Well, good afternoon, everyone. I thought the pace of assault was pretty heavy last week. If anything, it's picked up this week. Let me just go through a few items that are happening, virtually as we speak. Earlier today, I joined joined Tim Kaine and Chris Van Hollen and a number of members of Congress to try to stand up for the approximately 10,000 Americans who work for USAID, who are all in the midst of being suspended, let go. And frankly, this is remarkable in many ways. There's not anyone in the intelligence community or the defense community that doesn't advocate for America strength coming not only from our military, but from our position in standing in the world. Matter of fact, even my friend Marco Rubio, who's now Secretary of the State, when he was in the Senate, advocated for increasing federal relief funding. I often talk about Sudan, where there's more people die every day than Ukraine and Gaza combined, and yet we spent a year trying to open up relief to folks under assault, and we've now even got literally medicine rotting, American paid for medicine rotting, because we've cut off all of that assistance. I believe it's illegal. I believe it is morally wrong. It is also against our national security, and we're going to continue to put as much pressure as possible to try to bring some sunlight to this process. Elon Musk and his gang should not be defunding or programs by name on the basis of a tweet, and unfortunately that seems to be where we're headed. At the Banking Committee today, witnesses were talking about the integrity of a bank is based upon the trust and confidence that people have in that bank based on their reputation. And I tried to raise the point that in many ways the trust and confidence of the United States is also based on a reputation. And the idea that we have unelected individuals inside Treasury having access to the most individualized payment systems, literally not knowing whether these individuals have security clearances or not, is astounding. And I called on my Republican colleagues. The folks who are inside Treasury, they ought to be up and appearing before the Banking Committee, explaining who they are, what clearances they have, what background they have. What appears to be in the press, a 25-year-old with no experience, potentially manipulating the Treasury payment files. And we can't get an answer on that yet. I'll be putting out a call to the White House and the Treasury to put that information forward later today. We've seen as well, and this is just breaking as well, we've seen this buyout offer put out to our federal employees, which I believe is illegal, and let me assure you there's no money in the budget. Matter of fact, our funding for the federal government runs out March 14th. So federal employees who take this sham offer have no assurance that they'll get paid. The only thing they will have assurance is if there's not money there, they are marked as the first people to be riffed or eliminated. I met as well this morning with community health centers who are still, even though supposedly the freeze has been undone, still haven't been receiving the payments that they were scheduled to receive over the last 2 weeks. This is 400,000 at-risk Virginians. Some of these community health centers, they're already laying off staff and closing doors. Back on the national security side, this again, I believe illegal, non-paid for offer went out to all the CIA employees. And it just boggles the mind. I'm sure Elon Musk and his crowd don't know that it takes a year and a half to get a CIA clearance to go into the agency. It takes years to be trained. To somehow offer across the board buyout offer will weaken the United States of America real time. And even since this morning, that offer has been extended to all of the intelligence community. We really want our best cyber hackers who work for the government, they can go out and make 10 times more money working in the private sector. We really want to take them away from the front lines of protecting our data or fighting back against China. And finally, the FBI. We finally got the answers of which of the senior FBI leaders were being riffed and taken out of their positions. We see the head of cyber, the head of counterintelligence, the head of counterespionage. Literally across the board, you're taking some of the most senior people. I mean, we've laid out in our press release all these individuals' distinguished careers. This coming from a president who said he wanted to stand by law enforcement. This coming from a president who, in his first act, pardoned the rioters on January 6th, and now is going out and attacking literally the FBI agents who prosecuted those crimes. This is not standing up for law enforcement. This is standing up for rioters, insurrectionists against the rule of law. And I guess the final comment I'll make is, as somebody who's always tried to pride myself on being bipartisan, I can tell you around Virginia, programs are not being hit based upon whether they voted for a Democrat or Republican. Our national security and FBI is being hit across the board. We desperately need Republican officials at the local level, at the state level, at the federal level to stand up for rule of law and to say, you want to bring efficiency, count me in. I was very proud of the fact when I was governor, Virginia got named the best managed state. I'm all about efficiency and finding reasonable ways to cut costs. But this sledgehammer approach, which is unlawful and is going to chase away some of the best talent we have in the government, that's going to weaken our security, that's already weakened the FBI in terms of its expertise, is treading on extraordinarily dangerous grounds. And I appeal to folks across the state, if you are a community leader or other, people need to stand up and speak out. I hear from some local leaders, I hear from businesses, well, if they just keep their heads low, maybe this will pass by. This is not a time to keep your heads low. This is such an indiscriminate attack on rule of law, on our nation's payment systems, on our nation's privacy, and our nation's law enforcement, that if you've got a time to raise your voice, it's now. With that, Laura, I'd be happy to take your questions.
Hi, Senator. Thanks for joining us. I wanted to follow up a little bit more on what you just talked about. As someone who's been on the Senate Intelligence Committee for a long time, you're, of course, well aware of, as you just mentioned, it can take a year and a half to get security clearance. Can you talk a little bit more about what you're trying to do to get answers through Congress and through the administration about these people that are working with Elon Musk, who, my understanding, he does not have the highest level of security clearance himself. And obviously these, whatever they are, 19 to 25-year-olds that are working for him clearly had no time to get a security clearance before what they've started to do.
Remember, we're talking about Elon Musk, the wealthiest man in the world, who's calling for eliminating these foreign aid programs, which frankly, the whole foreign aid budget is a fraction of his personal net worth. Elon Musk, who has ties to China, his largest Tesla factory is there. He gets most of the batteries from China. He's never said a bad word about Chinese leadership, yet he's criticized American and European leadership virtually on a daily basis. For us not to know who are working on these DOGE task force, it violates every operating principle around keeping our nation's secrets safe, about trying to protect the payment flows, the idea that they are looking at all of the Treasury payments down to the individual level. We all know that there's times the United States government on some of its classified programs doesn't write out as that this is a check to entity X that's going to do Y. Sometimes that is kept secret. People may be disclosing that without knowing. You could blow up operations around the world that would be devastating. The idea at CIA, we've worked to reduce the security clearance backlog. We've got it down. It still takes upwards of a year to get fully cleared. into the CIA, and then you go through almost a year training program, some of that done in the Commonwealth of Virginia. And then it takes years of experience before you are put into some of these espionage activities. You're going to randomly ask across the board people to take a buyout to get paid for 8 months for doing nothing, which, by the way, again, is not funded. And that's going to make America safer. Or you go to the NSA, where we've got some of the best hackers in the world. They can all make 10x, but if they're under assault, because they are under assault, the person who's up right now, who I'll fight tooth and nail to prevent from getting into OMB, is a guy named Russell Vogt. He was the one who wrote Project 2025, and Trump denied even knowing about it. He is playing out this Project 2025 in real time. Mr. Vogt said he wanted to traumatize the federal workforce. He wanted to view them as villains. Well, do you really want to view our CIA agents, our NSA agents, all the other 18 intelligence community agencies as villains, as traumatized workforce? How does that make America stronger? It doesn't. We've talked about the leadership of the FBI being riffed without any look at individuals' performance. That doesn't make us stronger when we've got China inside our telecom networks with SolarWinds, when we've got threats of terrorist activities in the United States. It's flabbergasting to me. And where are other national security voices in a bipartisan way stepping up and saying this is not acceptable? Where is the leadership of the banking community to say we don't want the payment system of America being manipulated? Let's get these Doge kids up in front. They got to be identified. We got to know their records. We got to know, if they have even classification review. And if they don't want to do that entirely, they ought to at least do it in a classified setting. But we've got nothing. This is a group of folks run amok, and we are all going to be tested now, whether we're going to stand by rule of law or going to allow, frankly, potentially the dismantling of, our national government without regard to efficiency. These functions aren't going to go away unless you have a plan. You may simply have to replace with contractors or other things at twice the cost. The one thing I can tell you, especially, and there are already tweets coming about this from Russia and China, the people who most are supporting Musk and Trump and taking out foreign aid is Beijing and Moscow, because they know America is weaker if we're not supporting friends and allies and countries in need. And it's frankly very cheap for particularly Beijing to go in and supplement humanitarian aid in some of these countries. They use it as a tool of statecraft. America has used it for decades for the same. And people who are totally ignorant of these programs are going about randomly cutting and trying to eliminate them. And we are, again, where are the voices, both current and former, and particularly on my Republican side, who will stand up and say this is making America weaker?
Senator Warner, I wanted to ask you about the executive order that President Trump is signing today targeting transgender athletes, and just about, his transgender executive orders in general. The White House basically says they're getting rid of what they call gender ideology insanity. Any reaction to that?
Yeah, I've not seen the executive order. I knew it was coming. I think we've seen this issue, particularly around sports participation, ought to be left to the sports leagues. And, that is where it is best adjudicated. The idea that, under the guise of this executive order, I would imagine that you're going to see attacks on programs that have nothing to do with trans.
Senator, our next question is Kelsey Childress with WSET.
Hey, Senator, thanks for taking the time to do this. I know that last time we spoke, I brought up concerns about stolen SNAP benefits, and you said you would look into that. Have you had time to look into this issue, and are there any discussions on Capitol Hill about possibly reestablishing federal funding to give the money back for stolen SNAP benefits again?
Yeah, Chelsea, as you rightfully pointed out, and I appreciate you bringing this issue back up, I did look into it. We allowed a federal program that would reimburse people who've had their SNAP benefits stolen through no fault of their own to get reimbursed. That program expired. I've tried to raise the issue on how we could get it replenished or restarted. My fear with the Doge crowd is that I'm not sure you'd find much sympathy there, even though these folks' benefits have been stolen through no harm of their own. But we are raising it and seeing if we can get it reinstated. Senator Kaine and I have also been working with Governor Youngkin, and we are seeing if there could be some state relief. And if people's got a question about this, please go to a site that says Health and Human Resources at governor.virginia.gov. You can also call our offices, but we are working in close conjunction with the governor to see if we might be able to find some interim state relief until we can get this federal program reinstated. But thanks for asking the question, and thanks for getting my attention on it.
Senator, our next question is Bill Atkinson with the Petersburg Progress Index.
Senator, good to be with you this afternoon. A quick question. Last week, the administration ordered the Defense Intelligence Agency to restructure its calendar to downplay celebrations and acknowledgments of such events as Martin Luther King Jr. Day, Juneteenth, Black History Month, Pride Month, and Holocaust Remembrance Month. Many feel that the so-called logical next step in this process would be to expand that directive to the Defense Department. What is your take on that?
I think that the men and women who serve our country in arms, in the defense world, the fact is they are more representative of minorities than the general population. I know in many cases our African-American population is about 10 or 11% in the country, and I believe that in the military, in some branches of the service, it gets as high as 20%. We've seen, for example, in the Latino community, huge number of folks who sign up as defenders of our country, in the military, the Army, being a way to pat the middle class. I think it is disrespectful and outrageous that Donald Trump is trying to change American history, and let's face it, whitewash it, by taking out respect for Dr. King or recognizing the contribution of a whole lot of folks across our country that from different backgrounds that make up our armed forces. I think this does nothing to strengthen our country. If anything, that kind of effort to whitewash history, I think, will weaken our country in terms of we're having a hard enough time as it is, recruiting the right men and women to do these jobs. If it appears that the military, which in many ways was a path towards middle class, particularly for minorities in America, is now not going to be as friendly to those Americans, I think it weakens our country.
Senator, our next question is Drew Wilder with NBC4.
Hi, Senator. I know you were outside USAID today. Several of the attendees there, I don't know if you were able to hear them, but were chanting, "Do your jobs. What's the plan?" What is the plan for these workers that have already lost their jobs or are in fear of losing their jobs? Are Democrats handcuffed, or is there anything you can actively do to try to prevent additional job loss?
Well, and I think we ought to recognize that this is not, while it's the first attack against USAID, the next attack is going to be against Department of Education. They've already indicated the next attack will be against entities like the FDIC, which is one of the banking regulators. Do we really want to get rid of all the regulations on some of the largest banks? I don't think that's going to make America safer or stronger. And what our plan is, it's one, to vote against these Trump nominees. Two, it is to have a litigation strategy where these clearly illegal actions are litigated in court. Three, it is on demanding answers, for example, around these Doge individuals, who they are, what kind of clearances, are they violating the law again by having access to information that they're not cleared for? And four, this is going to be fought out in the public arena. And after they were shouting that, and I think they shouted that with all of us as we made our comments, is I would hope those very same protesters would go to the Republican House offices, the Republican Senate offices. I hope they go to local elected officials across the Commonwealth and across America. I hope they would go to state legislators of both parties. I go back to the community health centers. Some of the most important community health centers are in the reddest parts of Virginia, and South Side and Southwest. I want those same people who are angry to go into the local board of supervisors and your local state legislator and say, you've got to speak up. These are our communities that are being attacked. So this USAID is just the point of the spear, because there's such misinformation about foreign aid. Foreign aid at USAID is 0.5%, a half a penny on every dollar. That every military leader and intelligence leader says makes us stronger, because our strength comes from not just tanks and guns, but comes from our involvement in these countries. And we're getting weaker as we allow Russia and China to step in. Where is the national security community willing to call this out? So I hope those protesters, they can, happy to speak to them, but I ask them to, I hope their voices will be heard at the local level, at the state level, and yes, with our Republican colleagues so far who've not been willing to stand up against this Trump takeover.
Senator, our next question is Sarah Allen with CBS 19.
Hi, Senator. We know, as you kind of just touched on, people have been planning protests all over the country today against recent deportation orders and a lot of various Trump policies. What is your message to Virginians who are fearing ICE raids and maybe even taking part of these protests today?
Yes, listen, President Trump won this election in many ways because we didn't make the border secure enough. And I've supported strengthening the border. I even have supported, imperfect legislation, the so-called Laken Riley Act, that says if you have committed a crime, that ought to move you towards, and you're undocumented, that ought to move you towards deportation. But what I didn't sign up for, and what I will fight tooth and nail against, are ICE officials coming into our public schools, coming into our churches and synagogues and mosques, coming into our community health centers, and raiding those items, and what appears to be the case, sweeping up people based upon what they look like, not their legal status. We already have in most of Northern Virginia, since this fear has spread across the community, absentee rates that have approached in some jurisdictions 35%. You've got kids in schools that were just starting to come back from all the disruption caused by COVID. And now you send this fear across other communities where kids aren't showing up for school. At some point they're going to come back to school. If not, they're not going to be as productive members of society. But they're going to fall further behind because of this fear that if you go to school, the schools may be raided. We have to stand up against this. I would ask, I know the school boards have expressed concern. I hope, local parent organizations, this is about parent rights. Your kid ought to be able to go to school safely. This is, I can assure you, you get into the Department of Education and you suddenly give these 19 to 25-year-olds, which is the way these Doge kids have been described, access to all the personal files in the Department of Education. Do you really want that 20-year-old kid reading your financial standing about whether your kid got financial aid or not? And I can assure you, they're not just going to read files of folks who've got names that appear to be immigrants. This is time for people to step up and speak up. I had this whole notion that I hear this a lot from the business community, and I think it is disgraceful. Well, if we just keep our head low, just be quiet, maybe we can ride through this. That was the opinion people had before other great conflicts across the world, and that never played out very well. And this is creeping from USAID today, Department of Education tomorrow, the banking regulators next. There'll be no protection, consumer protections in terms of our banking world, and the whole notion that we've got kids who are I wouldn't lend my car to, somehow giving access to our most critical files of payments from the Treasury. This is beyond anything. I can tell you, this is beyond what even my Republican friends have thought was going to happen, but they need to speak up.
Senator, our next question is John Fredericks with The John Fredericks Show. John? Okay, we're going to move on to Margaret Barthel with WAMU.
Yeah, hi, Senator. I want to go back to your comments at the beginning about the funding freeze, unfrozen freeze on the community health centers. Are there other sort of categories of nonprofits that you're aware of that are being affected by, by the freeze that has sort of been rescinded, but maybe not?
Well, I think that's the case. We don't know if it's been rescinded or not. I know, for example, the Head Start programs were terrified last week. One of the Head Start programs down in West Point, Virginia, about 40 miles, 50 miles outside of Richmond, just through the normal funding cycle, their money ran out on last Friday. They finally got word over the weekend that grant would come through. But you had all those Head Start families, frankly, terrorized for a week about whether they're going to be able to have to get additional daycare that would come out of their pockets. We have seen community health centers, and we're going to try to get a list of this by the close of business today, where literally they have fired people and shut down services already. These organizations don't have 90 days of extra cash flow sitting around in their bank accounts. And we particularly have found this is the case with nonprofit organizations. I, again, appeal to our folks in Richmond. 40% of the Virginia budget is federal dollars that flow through Richmond into these state programs, sometimes that then support not-for-profits. I've not been told whether any of the nonprofits since the freeze have received funding. The Head Start programs are not necessarily nonprofits, they're more quasi-governmental. But we are continuing to hear, on a regular basis, what we're trying to make an appeal to Virginians is that we need not just anonymous stories, but we need people who are willing to cite their organization and, if possible, give their names so that we can put a face and a place to these stories so they're not, the West Point folks clearly gave me the ability to talk about this. But I tell you, I understand the level of, the one thing I recognize is, goes back to Project 2025. Make the federal workforce traumatized, make them villains. That is playing out, and we're trying to get more federal employees to give us their personal stories so that we can litigate on their behalf. But I can tell you the amount of pressure that has been brought to bear on my Republican Senate friends who are willing to vote against or thought about voting against the Bobby Kennedys or the Tulsi Gabbards or the Russell votes. It has been unprecedented. And at some point, I hope some of them will speak out with the level of detail that I know. I think people would, no matter how strong a Republican or MAGA supporter you may be, I think people would be repulsed at the kind of threats that are being made.
Senator, our next question is Dory Heckman with the Federal News Network.
Hi, Senator. Thanks so much for doing today's call. I wanted to follow up on your remarks regarding the intelligence community and their eligibility to receive these deferred resignation offers from OPM. We had heard from the beginning from OPM that they were exempting national security positions, and now we're hearing something different. Do you get the sense that members of the intelligence community have any surety that this is an offer that applies to them?
Well, my understanding is that the CIA director put out this offer yesterday, and I've heard just this morning that it's been extended to NSA and NGA and NRO, and I believe most of the community. There is no funding. There is no funding in those intelligence budgets to pay out 8 months of severance for those folks who leave. There is no plan if our top hackers or spies quit on how they will be replaced. There is no authority that I'm aware of that would allow these offers to be made. And if you cut through all the legalese, look at this guy's record, Donald Trump, of does he ever honor his commitments or pay his bills. I think what's happening, whether you're in the intelligence community or in the federal workforce, you are simply putting a big mark on your chest that when you put that resignation letter in, you may be cut loose with no benefits, or even if you're brought back, you're going to be the first person to get riffed. And the idea that we're doing this with no plan or estimation of how this will undermine our national security is a disgrace.
Senator, our next question is Janara Busi with 13 News Now. Janara? Okay, we're going to jump to our final question. Lindsay West with WRIC.
Hi, Senator. So we're starting to see a response to Trump's policies, hence the Project 2025 protests happening across the country today. I'm looking for your comment on these demonstrations, especially since they're happening in Virginia today, too.
Listen, I think it's important for people to speak out and speak up. I hope that the demonstrations, though, will focus on where the challenge is. Let's convince some of our Republican friends to stand up. I hope they had a lot of folks protesting at Tim Kaine in my office the other day. I hope they'll protest at Republican members. I hope they'll talk to our legislators. I hope they'll talk to our local elected officials. I go back to the community health centers who are shutting down. They're not shutting down just in parts that lean Democratic. They're shutting down in the reddest parts of Virginia. And I think the only way we stop this lawless action is to speak up and speak out and say this is not why Donald Trump got hired. He got hired promising that he was going to try to lower grocery prices. And instead, he's attacking our workforce. He's attacking programs for the most vulnerable. He's going off and making irresponsible claims that somehow America is going to pick up the cost and potentially send troops to Gaza. That's wacky. You know, all that would do is let off the hook wealthy countries in that region like Saudi Arabia and the Emiratis who want to help on the rebuilding, let alone what it would say to the rest of the world about the 2 million Palestinians who live in Gaza. This is the height of irresponsibility. If this is what you signed up for, then you're getting it. If you signed up for what you thought was going to be a focus on lowering inflation, bringing down grocery costs, and making America safer, this is not what is playing out, and we're only on day 18.
Senator, that was our final question.
Thank you.